Hey everybody, welcome to Cast and Core TV. This is your girl, Miss Public Info, here with the latest and greatest and sometimes hated updates of the most high-profile cases going on around the country. Today is October 6th, Monday, 2025. We made it to a new week. Thank you guys for joining me this morning. We have a jam-packed day. We're probably going to do a few episodes today. It is a Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I told you guys I would be doing a series on domestic violence awareness. We're going to sort of focus on cases this month, at least one case a day that is going to sort of spotlight domestic violence and talk about domestic violence awareness, spotlight some of the various forms of domestic violence, including male victim domestic violence, a more nuanced and also rarer reported, that is, domestic violence. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It's just male victim domestic violence is a lot less reported. And we'll talk about why that is. But this episode today, I believe we're on episode 112 today. We're going to focus on Sean Combs. Now, last week, the Sean Combs sentencing hearing took place just this past Friday, October 3rd, just 3 days ago, where Judge Submaranian, the trial court judge on this case, finally sentenced Mr. Combs to 4.1 years, which is about 4 years and 2 months, roughly. Mr. Combs will receive time for credit, rather, for time served, the 14 months that he's been at the MDC, and then he will, go to whichever prison or camp or whatever they choose institution to serve out the rest of his sentence, roughly around 3 years, could be shortened up a little bit to around two. Now, you might be saying, well, what are we talking about still talking about this case for? Because, well, last week, or actually Saturday, I kind of ended with, letting you guys know that Sean Combs' team, they have 14 days to appeal. They have been very, very vocal about the fact that they're going to appeal. I did a whole episode on a Saturday, sort of explaining, number one, why they feel they have a right to appeal, and then also explaining the issues with their appeal. Okay, their potential issues with the appeal. So now, in this particular episode, I'm going to talk about what went wrong in the sentencing. There's been a lot, sort of, thoughts on it. Obviously, it's easy to play a Monday night quarterback or Monday morning quarterback, but that is essentially what I'm going to play this morning because, as you all know, Cast and Court TV did a 7 hour live. The entire sentencing was around roughly 6.5 hours. I will say I'm rounding it up to seven. And we were on live for the entire sentencing. The sentencing was not televised, as no federal trials are televised, but it was allowed to be live tweeted by Inner City Press, where we got our information. And I merely, talked about what was being said, sort of gave a play-by-play, if you will, commentary, things of that nature. Before I go on, please don't forget to subscribe and like. Make sure you do that. All you got to do is reach down below, subscribe, like, share with others. Thank you so much for your support. If you are inclined to support the channel, please do. We take all proceeds and actually utilize them for you, because we use those proceeds to purchase any sort of filings, any materials, any investigatory materials that we need to give you the information that you want when you come to Cast and Court TV. So thank you so much for that. Also, every episode, it never fails. I always get someone who's like, you're not biased. You're not biased. Okay. Or you're unbiased. You're not unbiased. Excuse me. You're not unbiased. You're not unbiased. Well, guys, I'm not unbiased. I'm not a robot. Also, this is not a news reporting channel. I say it all the time, and I repeat for those in the cheap seats in the back who may not be listening, and I'm just sort of like white noise to you. When you turn this on again and actually utilize your active listening skills. Hear me when I say, let me pull it back. Here we go. I am not a news reporting channel. Okay. Now, we do sort of report the latest updates and all of that, obviously, but we don't just do that. Cast and Court TV also gives commentary. What do they call it in sports? A color analyst. That's essentially what I am, a color analyst as it relates to the law, as it relates to the legal process, as it relates to all of that. So, what does that mean? That means that I don't actually have a sort of unbiased opinion on all things. And domestic violence cases specifically, or cases in which it involves um, uh, partner violence or anything like that, as it is with the Sean Combs case, it is an impossibility for me to be unbiased. I talked to you guys about my time in law enforcement at the district attorney's office. I was the public information officer for the largest metropolitan district in the state of Colorado. I've since then worked in government and other places in law enforcement where I have worked with crime victims, specifically crime victims of domestic violence. Um, I was also certified by the Department of Justice as a sexual assault examination trainer, where I trained nurses and other people within the medical field to have the appropriate materials, know the correct questions and conversations that they needed to have in order to investigate um, sexual crimes. Sexual assault crimes as well. So, as a person that has trained not only nurses but also local law enforcement, PD, and people of that nature, and have been certified by the Department of Justice and spent many years at the district attorney's office, it is an impossibility for me to be unbiased when it comes to these kinds of cases, and especially cases that mount such a large degree of evidence. So, I repeat this again. For those of you who are looking for a pro Diddy channel, or you are looking for someone to give you the play by play that sort of casts him in a brighter light, this is not the topic for you to join this channel or the topic for you to listen to this channel. Skip me, go to someone else that's a little bit more pro Diddy, because I'm not, particularly not only because of the case itself, but because he's a convicted felon and now he's been sentenced. So, with that all out of the way, we are going to proceed yet again. We will proceed yet again with our version of the Monday morning quarterback of the sentencing. Okay, so what went wrong in the sentencing? Mostly, guys, went wrong in the Sean Combs sentencing was he didn't make his speech to the judge, nor any of his attorneys. They didn't at any point make it about the victims. They were extremely, extremely clear and on point with the fact that they did not view Cassie Ventura, Jane Doe, Daphne Joy, or the male escorts as victims. Okay. Now, that is a problem. Some of you may be asking, well, why is that a problem? Well, it's a problem because that is essentially what sort of drove home his opportunity or his inopportunity to go home, literally. This is the reason the judge sentenced him to time behind bars. This is the reason the sentence included incarceration time, and the reason he wasn't given time served, because Sean Combs was arrogant during the hearing. Now, some people that were sort of notating the play-by-play and all of this may not have understood. You guys have to understand, number one, Judge Submaranian is looking at the entire picture of this trial. So we're not just looking at, today. So the defense really starts behind the eight ball because, number one, their client or the defendant is a convicted felon at this point. So he's behind the eight ball just in general because he is has been convicted of a crime, convicted by a jury trial. Okay. So, and this is the same jury trial that the judge who was doing the sentencing presided over. So this person has already looked into the jury trial. They know everything that happened. They know the conduct of the defendant. They know the conduct of the Department of Justice. They know the conduct of the jury itself. They know everything that's going on. So really, it would have been to Mr. Combs's great advantage, actually, to come into this sentencing. Really, what I said from the beginning, guys, is falling on his sword, essentially just falling at the mercy of the court. Sean Combs verbally said in his speech to the court, I'm at the mercy of the court, but his actions said otherwise. Now, let's go through that. 5 attorneys spoke on his behalf. Now, the defense, his supposed dream team, which I would say they are not, and they took several L's during the sentencing hearing, by the way. The his supposed dream team was nothing short of, a Sunday night dinner theater. It was a cheap shot at an opportunity to sort of, influence the judge. But it was in vain because we had from Nicole Miss Westmoreland crying, sobbing, pretending to sob and cry as though, she was, mourning a lover or someone. To you have Brian Steele referring to Mr. Combs as a civil rights leader. Do you know what that takes to be called a civil rights leader? Mr. Combs was an entrepreneur, yes, a forward-thinking entrepreneur, a shining beacon within the Black community, yes, but a civil rights leader, not so. Would not take it that far. Then you had members of his team, trying to defend the fact that Sean Combs arrogantly already set up speaking engagements marked for this week, a week after the sentencing, with the foregone conclusion, without having even been sentenced, that he was going to be out in the world and available for speaking engagements to impart his wisdom on to other folks who needed him, because he had already did this, a free game class there in the MDC, and he was a role model to so many people. But we forget Sean Combs did not get into this position because he volunteered his time to be a role model in the MDC or in the legal system. He got here because of his conduct or his misconduct and his subsequent conviction of that misconduct. So, why am I saying this? I'm saying this because where he also missed the mark was his blueprint explanation of his plan, a plan, a plan for his life after his time in the MDC. What exactly is your plan? Mr. Combs spent a lot of time, his attorney spent a lot of time sharing with us that he was never going to commit another act of a felony or another get in trouble ever again, that he was never ever going to be in trouble again, that this was not something that he was going to have to deal with again. But he never told us exactly how. How are you going to fix this? How are you going to maintain your sobriety? How are you going to ensure that you don't go this way again? So much so that the judge didn't know at the end. And when Judge Submarinian sentenced him, he verbatim said, Mr. Combs, I actually cannot sentence you to anything other than a period of incarceration, because that is what's necessary to deter, because I don't know that if you go back out there, I don't know that you wouldn't reoffend. I think you would. I think you would reoffend again. You would be doing it again. And the reason the judge said that, besides his behavior, is because Sean Combs never ever took the opportunity, the various opportunities he's had, even just in that time, short time period in the sentencing phase of this case, to say how he was going to actually maintain his sobriety to drugs and alcohol, but also his sobriety as it relates to his anger, how he reacts to anger, what programs he was going to get involved in, what sorts of therapy he was already involved in. He never really took the time to explain that to the court. And so the judge really had nothing to go on there. His team never took that into consideration. They never said specifically what programs. All they could give the court was the programs that Sean Combs was going to be in a position of leadership in. Not that Sean Combs will actually be seeking help in certain programs to ensure that he was rehabilitating himself. And that falls in line with his refusal to see Cassandra Ventura, Daphne Joy, and the various escorts as victims. Because what that says to the court is you don't see these folks as victims and you're not looking to rehab yourself. So therefore, you're not taking any accountability. That's the reason why the court says continuously, or said continuously, that he wasn't taking accountability. It was all lip service because his attorneys kept saying every time one went up there, he takes full accountability. Then he goes into this letter, this diatribe of a letter, 4-page letter that he wrote, and sort of, gives us a synopsis of that letter when he speaks to the judge, because he doesn't read from the letter verbatim, but he basically, says much more of the same and parrots his attorneys and saying, I'm remorseful. But he never shows that he's remorseful. So these are empty words, essentially, because he never tells us that I'm going to rehabilitate myself. He just says, I'm not going to reoffend. I'm not going to do this again. Then he goes on to say that he's a drug addict, but then he doesn't tell us how he's going to maintain that sobriety. A big mistake of Sean Combs, guys, is that he never reveals to the court, which this information comes out during the trial court phase, but he never reveals to the court in his sentencing or in the many filings beforehand when he's trying to get bail, he's trying to do all these things. He never reveals to the court that he's bipolar, that he has mental health issues. Now, Mark Agnifilio tried to touch on this a little bit and says, he lost his father. There's trauma there. This is a mental health thing. Well, first of all, Sean Combs is 54 years old, 55 years old. He will be 55 later this month. Sean Combs lost his father when he was 3. Not saying it wasn't traumatic. Many people lose their parents, and it's obviously traumatic. But we can't reasonably look at a loss of a father in childhood, adolescence, and sort of try to pair that to actions that a man has taken during his adult lifetime. As recent as last year when he choked out Daphne Joy at 54 years old. So we can't utilize the dad trope as the reason, why he has mental health issues or why he's experiencing trauma that made him act in these adverse ways. He's bipolar. So if he's bipolar, then that is an actual legitimate mental health condition that the court would have been able to receive in a more genuine way. And likely, if that would have included treatment pathways or treatment options, or being open to the court assigning a treatment a treatment option or a treatment pathway, then perhaps then incarceration could have been avoided. But if you're too prideful to include that into your sentencing or plea to the court or your case filing or whatever, then you have to deal with the consequences as they are. Actually, his bipolarism, and I was listening to Judge Mathis, who I periodically listen to as it relates to this case because I respect Judge Mathis. He also said the same thing. So I'm actually echoing Judge Mathis when I talk about this as well. But he and I both agree that Sean Combs, had he sort of, mentioned this bipolarism or the possibility of a bipolar um um of a bipolar the word I'm looking for, brain fart, of a bipolar diagnosis, of a bipolar diagnosis, then perhaps the court would have looked at him differently. Now, Sean Combs had, and you may have heard, or if you didn't, because it wasn't televised and everyone's not looking at, the same thing I'm looking at during the sentencing hearing. But during the sentencing hearing, the DOJ mentioned that Sean Combs's therapist did not finish, handed in an incomplete report. Is what it said, is what they said, and I think part of that is Sean Combs's pride. So we're still very much dealing with a prideful individual, which lets you know that he still has some of these danger tropes that he had that caused him to get into the situation that he's in. He's not fully at the mercy of the court, because if he were, he would have mentioned that this bipolar diagnosis, or that his therapist is suspicious that he has bipolar, that he has this condition, and that he needs to seek treatment for that, the appropriate treatment. Listen, being bipolar is a legit mental health disorder, and this is something that could have helped him avoid incarceration, especially because of what we know now, that he received the lowest end of the incarceration. Also, it fits the behavior of Sean Combs going into these manic phases of his sort of personality, going to the point where he's just like completely, in another world, in another body, sort of thing. Sean Combs being hypersexualized, being an sex addict, in this sense, is also a bipolar trait. A complete shutdown at times is also a bipolar trait, like sort of this up and down sort of thing. It would explain a lot. His attorney was upset with the Department of Justice, who continued to mention Sean Combs's drug problem. Well, they only mentioned it because Sean Combs's attorneys and his attorneys and him himself kept saying that it was his 25-year drug addiction that caused him to act in these ways, that caused him to beat on Miss Ventura, Miss Daphne Joy, that caused him to abuse drugs, that caused him to hire these escort or these sex workers, because he had an out of control sex addiction, that caused all of this mayhem that was going on in his life. If you couple the bipolarism with someone who is also a drug addict, as it relates to 2C and cocaine and KY, and or not KY, not KY gel, guys, but that too apparently, but ketamine and methamphetamine and Molly and MDM, and what's the other one? I'm missing one. Ecstasy. and all this. So that's like seven drugs that I mentioned right there. So if you're pairing that with someone is who is already chemically imbalanced because of bipolarism, you are talking about a very, very uh like high octane person. Somebody who, for all intents and purposes, at this point has no real human emotion because he's just all the time sort of in a ball of confusion. It would also align with some of the character traits that Cassie Ventura actually described when she was saying that, you never know how he would react, that you are afraid to say anything, and that he would just randomly get into these fits of rage, is what she said. Okay. So being bipolar and having that diagnosis would actually fit the profile of what was reported or what was testified to, the randomly, attacking employees and throwing bowls of food at people from across the room and all these things. These are very manic episodes or manic depressive traits of bipolarism. They are. And if you are not medicated, taking lithium or any of the other ones, and I've seen this, the reason I know is because I've seen this come across my desk while at the district attorney's office. Cases where people would not be on their lithium and they would like commit heinous acts during the time in which they would commit be unmedicated, and then they would the judge go before the judge, and the judge would give them an opportunity, and then they would say, you need to get on your medication, and they would come back for a rehabilitation check-in 6 or 7 months later, and you're looking at a completely different person. Why does this matter? It matters because this could have kept Sean Combs from being incarcerated. This could have actually, revealing this, could have actually been his quote unquote get out of jail free card. Revealing this could have actually got him on that flight over the weekend to Miami with his family. But he didn't want to reveal it. This is very similar to what Judge Mathis said when he did an interview with, I think, Vlad TV or someone just yesterday. And he said the same thing I'm saying. He said, I don't know if it was pride or whatever it is, but he probably should have revealed it. I agree with Judge Mathis on this. This would have been a game changer for Sean Combs' sentencing. Had he revealed that he was, bipolar, or even that there was a suspicion by his therapist that he could potentially have a mental health condition, bipolarism, depressive, manic condition, it could have been a game changer, because now we're not talking about someone who is willfully committing heinous acts. Now we're talking about somebody who is committing heinous acts because they are unmedicated or under medicated. That's what we're talking about. So it isn't an excuse, but it is a reason. And then the judge can then sort of sentence based on not only public safety, but also the needs of the person. You're going to have to do this inpatient therapy. You're going to have to get on medication. You're going to have to do this, do that, do this. But I think Mr. Combs doesn't want to appear to be weak. He still has this bravado as it relates to what he deems to be weakness, or what he deems to be, his persona and his image as, a powerful person or whatever. He commented to the court during his speech to the judge that he had lost everything. But I disagree. Sean Combs hasn't lost everything. Because had Sean Combs lost everything, he'd be willing to do anything to prove to the court that it wasn't me. It really was the sickness. Now, he did mention that in his letter and his speech to the court, that it was a shame. It was sick. It was this sickness. I was sick. Explain how you're sick. Complete the sentence. This is the same thing I talk about when I say that he says that he will never commit these acts again, but then doesn't go forth and complete the sentence on how. You need to tell us. You need to tell us how you're sick and what way are you sick. It's got to be more than I was sick. I was sick. I was sick. I was sick. Were you clinically sick? Like you are bipolar? Then if you are, this could explain some things to the court and this would make sense to the court. And then the judge could have some sympathy because now we're not talking about a monster in terms of the fact that you're willfully committing these acts. Now we're talking about a really mentally ill person that requires treatment in order to fix these monster like behaviors. But if you don't do that, Mr. Combs, then you're just a monster and we're going to sentence you accordingly. I thought it was very arrogant of his um, legal staff, and obviously they're being pushed by Mr. Combs, which again goes into sort of his thought process and how he hasn't really changed that much. But I thought it was very arrogant for his team to come outside and do that gaggle on the courthouse steps and talk about Judge Submarinian in a way in which, naming him the 13th juror after, just coming out of that courtroom and saying how much they respected him and respected his conviction. I mean, his ruling, just as much as I thought it was arrogant for them to file the Rule 33 and Rule 29 attempts of acquittal or a new trial, and yet, say and contend that they respect the jury's decision, but you don't. So, this is very much, sort of Sean Combs sort of playing the puppeteer. This is very much along the lines of what Cassie Ventura said in part rather, in her letter to Judge Submarinian, that this, guy was a master manipulator. Also, what the Department of Justice said in front of Judge Submarinian there at the sentencing, that this guy was the ultimate puppet master, and how he's sort of been puppeteering folks along the way. And we can see him doing that in the post conviction and the post sentencing phase of this case, and trying to, or telling his attorneys, no, he wants to win. I had heard from sources that Sean Combs is upset right now, not so much in the way of which he's, depleted of, and sorrowful, but more so he's mad at the fact that he's going to do any time at all. And he is in fight mode, is what sources are saying about Sean Combs at this moment. And I thought that was very interesting because that would also be indicative of the fact that Sean Combs, again, has no sort of thought or real empathy for the victims in this case, and pretty much contends that there are no victims in this case. And when you have that sort of thought process, which Judge Submarinian picked up on, then you're going to be a sentence accordingly, a sentence the way that Judge Submarinian sentenced. Also, as it relates to sort of Sean Combs saying in this speech to Judge Submarinian, like they, I know they want you to make an example out of me. It's like, there's a lot of sort of like so faux empathy that Sean Combs tried to garner to the judge when it wasn't real at all. He's literally, and he tells on himself, I'm not saying any of this to get a lighter sentence, but you are, and he was. Instead of sticking to the victims, being sorrowful about the victims, I tell you, I have sat through probably hundreds at this point of sentencing hearings, like a lot. I've sat through a lot of sentencing hearings. I've covered a lot of sentencing hearings, some of the biggest sentencing hearings that have, been in the legal field, because we're talking about sentencings that were, for instance, unalivings. Whether it be, manslaughter or vehicular homicide or, first degree unalivings. I've sat through them all. And one of the things that many defendants do, even when it's not, an unaliving or anything, but I'm using that because that's as serious as you can get in our legal system. Um, but even one thing that those defendants do is that they make it about the victims. They even know, even those defendants who are looking at no possibility of parole, looking at life, looking at dire circumstances, even those defendants know that it is about the victims. It's not about you. It's not about you and what you do as a defendant when you have an opportunity to address the court and make it about you. You then express arrogancy, or as the Department of Justice put it, the ultimate hubris, because you then allowed the people to see, or the judge to see, that from the beginning, which was likely the causation of the act that gave birth to the conviction, um, from the beginning, it's always been about you. It's not been about other people. That your way of thinking, your way of navigating is singular, that it is about you only. Also, you know, the other thing, if you're going to make it about you, if that's what you're going to do, and you're not going to mention the victims, and it's not about the victims, and you don't care about them in that way, fine. But you don't have to let everyone know it, because you're only shooting your own self in the foot for that matter. But if that's what you're going to do, then when you make it about you, be smart about it. Tell the court, Sean Combs, that you have a diagnosed, or there is a suspicion that you are bipolar, and that you will be getting the rehabilitation, the treatment that you need to help yourself deal and manage this mental disorder, and that you're going to be taking the steps to, seeing a psychotherapist, taking the necessary medication, blah, 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 blah. There could be a myriad of reasons why Sean Combs did not want to reveal the bipolar situation. Listen, one big one that I'm thinking about, even though all of his kids, with the exception of one, the baby love kid, is, the fact that, then he would have some sort of issues with child custody, maybe with baby love. I have no idea. Maybe that would, be ammunition for her mother to try and get, sole custody and some sort of, leverage over him. And not just her, but, him sort of revealing that could have given leverage of many people over him. And maybe that's one of the reasons he did not mention that. But I gotta tell you, I agree with Judge Mathis on this. It was a mistake for Sean Combs not to mention the bipolarism. I get it, because obviously this also, as it relates to his reputation is already sliced up, right? But as it relates to his reputation and sort of living a parallel life to Kanye West, which people have accused him of, he also did not want to be further compared to Kanye West, likely, has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So I mean, there's a lot of things going on there, and a lot of reasons why he probably didn't want to make that grandstand and say like, oh, this is, something that I'm really dealing with, because it could have, he didn't want that to sort of usurp the headline, you know. But it certainly is something that I heard Judge Mathis say, that he's bipolar. that I also remember as part of the trial court phase of the case that this was a potentiality. And all I could think of, when this was going on, and also afterwards, when I was sort of thinking about the sentencing, is why didn't he really mention his mental health issues instead of agnifilio or agnifilo? I think I'm saying his name wrong. I think it's agnifilo. Instead of agnifilo, just sort of, lightly brushing around the fact that he has a mental health issues, and sort of couching it, or rather pairing that with the fact that his father was unalived when he was 3 and he was never in his life, and he didn't find out until he was an adult in 2014 that he was unalived in a drug deal. But you had been committing these acts prior to 2014. So you'd have to come up with something else as the actual reason you were doing this, or the catalyst for you doing this. So it's just interesting, interesting, interesting. Okay, guys, we're going to come back in a few. We're going to come back and talk about a few things going on in the court process now. I am just very anxious to sort of talk about this. I want to talk about domestic violence. Obviously, it's domestic violence month, and I'm going to be doing a series on domestic violence. So every episode we're going to have a case dedicated to domestic violence, the awareness thereof, steps people can take. I'm going to have phone numbers and websites and all kinds of sources and materials for you guys in the description box for each of those episodes where we talk about that. We're also going to talk about Ghislaine Maxwell and why the Supreme Court basically rejected her appeal. That's coming up. Also, coming up is several states are suing the President of the United States, and we are going to talk about why. Okay, guys, we'll get with you later. Thanks so much for joining Cast and Court TV. We'll see you in a bit with the other episodes, but thanks for hanging with us this morning for the latest and greatest and sometimes hated updates of the most high profile cases going on around the country. We'll see you soon. Thanks so much, guys. Peace.